good to be back in San Francisco. I'm Jen, for those of you that don't know me, Gavin's wife. And I've had a front row seat to this story from the very beginning. Not the very, very beginning, but the beginning of the process of writing this story. But before we begin, Gavin and I want to pause to honor someone who shaped this book in profound ways. His editor, Anne Godoff, passed away this week. And Anne was a legend in publishing, but even more in how she saw people. She eventually pushed Gavin to write something deeply personal, not a political account, but a human one. And he trusted her completely. We feel her absence here tonight, so can we please just take a moment to honor her? Now, I've watched Gavin wrestle with this book for years. And I don't mean as the governor or as a former mayor, I mean as a son sitting with complicated and painful memories. As a brother, replaying old conversations and wondering if he showed up the way he should have. As my husband, thinking about partnership, and is he the partner he hopes to be? And as a father, reflecting on the kind of father he wants to be for his kids. There are many versions of Gavin in the world. Just take a look at social media. But what you'll find in these pages is the one that I admire and love so much. The curious, determined, deeply empathetic policy wonk who reflects far more than people realize. And being here tonight in San Francisco, where so much of this story began, feels so right. This city breathes life through these pages in a way that's impossible to separate from who he is. It's where he grew up. It's where he started his businesses and career, where he made his first mark on the world in public service, where he lost his footing, and where he began to understand who he wanted to be, shaped in no small part by so many of you in this room. Mimi Silbert, a force of nature in this city and his state, influenced him in more ways than I can count. Mimi, we love you. His sister Hillary, who has never once let him off the hook. Thank God, Hillary. God, I always call you when I'm pissed. And his mother, Tessa, who questioned whether he should even enter politics. We love you, Tessa. Tessa was 19 when she became pregnant with Gavin, and after the divorce, she was working 2 and sometimes 3 jobs while raising 2 very young children, largely on her own. She opened their home to renters and a foster brother to make ends meet, but she still made sure that her children felt steadiness and groundedness, even when life felt anything but. The grit that people see in Gavin, it started with her. Watching her refuse to give up. And in many ways, that's why he wrote this book. For our children, not to claim their whole story, but to offer them a piece of their father's history in his own words, so that when they're ready, they can trace some of those threads for themselves. So tonight, that story moves off the page and into conversation, and I'm especially pleased he'll be in conversation tonight with Bay Area legend Kara Swisher. Kara has been chronicling San Francisco and Silicon Valley since before most of us understood what was taking shape here. No one understands San Francisco and Silicon Valley quite like she does. She's watched this region reinvent itself and again, and she's never been afraid to press where and when it counts. I have a feeling she'll keep him on his toes. But please keep it light tonight, Kara. We have a daughter in the house. And to Gavin, I've had the privilege of seeing you lead in public life, but I've had the greater privilege of knowing you, your heart, your soul, your partnership. My love, my husband, my partner in crime. And tonight feels full circle. Family is here, friends are here who knew you when you were just a kid with big ideas. The city that raised you is here. And I'm so proud of you for sitting with all of this stuff and turning it into a masterpiece. And for the rest of you, I promise the man on these pages is even better in person. Please help me welcome my husband, Governor Gavin Newsom, and Kara Swisher.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you. All right.
Everybody, I have a pretty bad voice tonight. I'm sorry to sound like RFK Jr.
Well done.
Well done. I like how you bring your wife here to try to get me to be nice.
That's it. I know. That was. I mean, we worked on that speech for the better part of the last week.
Sadly, it's not going to work.
Unbelievable. Trust me, I know.
So I am at a disadvantage with this voice, but I'm used to men over talking me. So.
Oh.
Yeah, that goes.
This is how it starts. This is how it always starts. And to think that I asked you to do this.
You did.
Wow.
I don't know why you did.
Wow, I know.
Anyway, I apologize if it sounds bad. We're actually taping this for my podcast, which I do a lot of talking. And so this is sort of unfortunate that it was tonight. But I did fly all the way out here to be with you, Gavin Newsom.
I'm grateful.
A
round of applause for the travel alone. I'm grateful. Thank you. Seriously.
It's a pleasure to come to San Francisco. I love San Francisco, as everybody knows. And I'm excited to talk to you. And in exchange, I apparently can stay in the Lincoln bedroom someday, perhaps. Anyway. All right.
It's, I'm told it has a nice remodeled bathroom.
I heard.
So,
yeah. I like marble.
Yeah.
I like a marble bathroom a lot. Not that one, but still. All right, let's go. We're going to start. We're going to do it just like a podcast. Gavin Newsom, thanks for coming on. There's lots to talk about. This is the last year as governor. You've got plans for what's next. So welcome, Gavin Newsom, Governor Newsom.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you.
All right, we're going to start with your new memoir, Young Man in a Hurry. Good title, excellent title. But one of the things...
I mean, you like the title, honestly? What do you think?
I thought you could have smiled more on the cover, but...
All right, I know.
I'm teasing. I always tease men about that.
And were you able to pick up why it's called Young Man in a Hurry?
Yes, why don't you tell people? I did. Go ahead.
No, well, I mean, let's get into that in a moment. But it is interesting. The actual title comes from The Economist magazine that did what I could objectively describe as a bit of a hit piece on me. Oh. And said I was... Gavin Newsom wants to be governor of California, really, ? And then talked about this young man in a hurry. And I love the way they described it. And in so many ways, I connected with it, not as a critique, an external critique, but a self-critique, the more that I absorbed and looked back when I had a chance to reread the article about 15 years later.
It is a trope. It is a trope of a young man, like, desperate, either to come out to California or whatever. Yeah.
No, I mean, look, the whole book, and I appreciate the way Jen described it. It's not a politician's book. If you came to get a book about politics, 10-point plan, how to, restore the American dream, that's not what this is about. It's a book that is, really scrutinizes who I am, not sanitizes it. Try to really sort of break through and challenged my own assumptions of myself, my family, my relationship to a lot of issues that all of us here have a very intimate relationship to, and I tried to just sort of break the core of who I was and stress test it in a way that ultimately led me to a subtitle called A Memoir of Discovery. In the process of writing this, I learned about my parents, I learned about my grandparents, and I learned about myself in a way that has, really shifted my mindset and radically
About
altered
yourself.
my world. Yeah, myself, my relationship to my job as an elected official, how I put a mask on, how I had a pose growing up, how I tried to become someone I wasn't, how my face started to grow into the mask, how I showed up even as a kid. I mean, I was wearing suits to high school. Exactly.
This does not surprise me, but go on.
It doesn't surprise you. But, it's all in an effort to overcompensate. And so it's really a journey. It's about insecurity. It's about anxiety. It's about that insecurity and anxiety that's still with me today. It's about constantly becoming a better person, a better man.
It wasn't a memoir at first, right? Ann Godoff shifted it. It was more of a
so
book.
just very briefly the history of this, and God bless Ann. She literally passed on the day of the publication. And anyone who knows in the book world, she's a rock star.
Legendary.
She's the Kara Swisher of publishing in so many ways. And she's tough beyond words. And so I submitted the book, and originally it was the first year I was in office, and she asked, be interesting, she said, talk about Trump at the time. Trump 1.0 was still president. I was governor, and then COVID hit. And ultimately, I worked through the process of finishing the book about my first 4 years. And it was a relationship to Trump, and it was a relationship to the Biden campaign, and obviously to a lot of the challenges, travails in the state of California. I submitted the book, never forget, on Zoom, and bated breath. And I was absolutely convinced that if there was going to be a critique, I was really proud of it, that the critique would be this one chapter talking about my mother and my dad.
Right.
And I remember she said, well, and you could just feel she was about to, I said, I'm happy to take out that chapter. And she cuts me off and says, that's the only good one. Jesus. And she says, that's the book I want. She said, I thought I knew you. And she said, the reason I did this is, I thought I knew you. And I don't think I know you as well as I know. She thought I was some pampered prince trust fund kid. And she had no idea of, that 19-year-old, as Jen described,
right.
Raising two kids on her own.
It became a memoir when it wasn't.
Yeah, and so then I had to go back and write a whole nother book. Right. And the book became, when I talk about this being a memoir of discovery, when you have to go back, and you have to go back much deeper, and you've got to understand, things that, that you can't sanitize in a one-chapter bio of your entire life, and that has become it's been a revelatory process for me.
It had a feel of Obama's book like that. That was sort of a version of that.
No, and impossible not to have loved that book. Of course, at the time, no one paid much attention to that book, and then Obama became Obama, and everyone went back to it and learned those motivations, those setbacks, and a little bit more of
not an
who he was.
Similar story. So, in the beginning of the book, you were talking about the gold rush, and you noted we've never really rid ourselves of its voracious impulse. Nice pair of words together there. I'd like to start you asking what that meant, and also how that manifests today and in your own ambitions.
Well, it's interesting. When I first became governor, I got sworn in, and a week or so later, I was with a Native American community doing the first official apology in the state of California for the genocide against Native American people in our state. And I quoted the first governor, Barnett, I believe his first state of the state was in 1853, and he literally talked about the war of extermination. And they talked about bounties for scalps. And it was a celebrated speech at the time. And, the book opens up with me sitting near the American River, a river that was very familiar to me in my youth because I was connected with my father, who was a fierce environmentalist. And one connection I did have with my father when I was young was episodic. He had left us when I was relatively young. He had run for San Francisco supervisor, lost, ran for state senate and lost. And I didn't know, and thank God, his oral history was not lost. We found at the Bancroft Library, he talked about those two races. He never talked to me about those two races. And it said that he was broke and broke in, and that's the reason he left. He needed change of scenery and went up to Lake Tahoe and left my mom with two young kids. Again, neither of them ever talked about why they got divorced. But I begin the book reflecting on the American River, our connection to Eureka,
Yeah,
Eureka.
absolutely.
Try to
This
paint a
idea
picture of this
about
state.
voraciousness. It's an unusual thing to pick at the beginning. of the book.
Because we have voracious appetites, consumption, overconsumption, the sort of an unctuousness, and in so many ways, extractions, water, of course, marks so much of the consideration.
What would you say your voracious impulse was?
Well, I've had many, I imagine, and I think many of them are described in this book.
Yeah, they are.
I was, of course, describing the state, not
Sure.
my state of being, but the state's sort of history in relationship. Go west, young man, go west. This notion of California being a state of dreamers, of doers, of entrepreneurs. But so much of our politics is defined by water policy, defined by consumption, some cases overconsumption, defined by scarcity, not just abundance. And so this notion of voraciousness
was
described in that slide.
So I'm curious, so what prompted you to write the book aside from the obvious reasons of running for president? Now, let me say, we're not going to be playing that game that they like to do on CNN. Now, reviews are mixed. Have you read the reviews?
I literally have not.
Oh,
Will
good.
not.
I can do that for you.
Okay, God bless.
These are kind of interesting. They just can't give you, I think it's beautifully written, I have to say. I liked it a lot. But he can be both irritatingly slick and refreshingly resolute. That was one of them.
That was about the book or me?
You. Okay. Well, the book. It's your memoir. It is you. This one I liked. It's like Hillbilly Elegy, but for middle-class alcoholics in the Bay Area with close ties to petroleum magnates. Because when I think of you, I think of J.D. Vance. I do not. You know, it's, no, I
like
don't.
The audience.
I
know
don't.
Your audience.
That was a joke. We'll get to him in a minute. So what prompted you to do that? Do you feel like you had to write a book?
Oh, the opposite. I was writing a
you have
book about
before.
something else, and
Yeah.
as I just described, and so that was the journey. And you know, look, this book, it's dedicated to my kids so they can continue the story. And the great thing is, you don't have to like it, you don't have to like me, but I finally was able to tell my story and give you my perspective. I stress tested my own assumptions and tried to crack open and go a little bit deeper. And I don't often see that. Maybe these reviewers do in other political books. And I did it, I didn't do it for the third thing. I didn't do it for the reviews. I didn't do it for the sales. I did it because I wish my parents had done something like this. I didn't know about my mom's relationship to what Jen was introducing a moment ago. The reason she didn't want me to run in so many ways is shaped by the fact that her marriage ended because my father's ambitions in politics.
Right.
She never told me. I didn't understand that. I always resented her for not wanting me to be in politics, never fully understanding that. I didn't understand her own struggles. There's a scene in the book where she's, as a young girl, is thrown against the fireplace by her father with a gun to her head and her sister's head. My grandfather threatening to kill my mom and her sister. My grandfather eventually committed suicide. He was a prisoner of war. I didn't understand how broken he became after that experience, the march in Corregidor. I didn't understand my grandmother's parents and how they were part of the whole Red Scare, how close my great-grandfather was to Oppenheimer and the Bay Area. We found all of these old FBI files. And so the reason I wrote it is because it started to reveal itself. It wrote itself
rather than do
in all of these stories.
Because your last book was more wonky, more.
Yeah, the last book was a policy book. This is not a policy book, and it's not about me. It's about the people that shaped me. It's a love letter to my mom. It's a love letter to single moms that are out there struggling every single day with kids. It's, and it's a messy story. It's life, and so I did not write this to sanitize anything. I didn't want to explain anything away. I just, it's just like, let it go. And I hope, maybe to the extent, one second just on this, because I think it's important. I hope you've seen in my politics generally this last year, I'm hardly being timid. If you've seen my social media.
Yeah.
I I'm on the other side, honestly. And so the book's a reflection of that, my politics, and it's for the first time in my life, I'm taking a deep breath
So,
and just let it go let it land where it might.
It ends in 2018. You became governor-elect. It's mostly about your childhood, as you said, and a lot of family history. But why did you stop there? I'm curious, because lots of this has happened in those years.
Because I didn't want to make it was about the last moments with my dad.
Right.
It's a memoir. It's a love letter, again, to them. It's, to the extent that I'm main character, it's in relationship to trying to understand them. And my dad, I never fully appreciated in writing this book, in absorbing it. He survived long enough to see his son get elected governor. And that's, and in so much of the last, 6-7 years of, his blessed and cursed state, how many times I wish I could pick up the phone, talk to my father, sort of contextualize, or talk to my mom, thank my mom. So many, by the way, my foster brother's here, Suleiman, my sister's here, but so many of these characters came to life, and I never had a chance to thank them. My sister's the real rock star in this book.
Yes.
And the rock in terms of that relationship to my mom, and I was not a great son. And through the process of writing this is why I wrote it.
So just for people who
for
know,
different reasons.
You're mentioning this a lot. Your parents were divorced when you were young. Your mom didn't come from money. Your dad was a state judge, for people who don't know. He was also close confidant to one of the wealthiest families in the world, the Gettys. And even though you weren't wealthy, you grew up around that wealth because of that. Talk about how that shaped your worldview as a kid, and moving between these two worlds. One of the things you've long complained about is this Prince Gavin label that you get. A lot of ways, you talk about it a lot in the book, and I don't know if it reinforces it, but you discuss it.
Yeah, I talk about how I played into it.
Yeah.
I talk about how I reinforced it through my own actions, how complicit I am.
Talk a little bit about that, because what you're called in the book supposedly privileged upbringing, right? This image.
Well, I'd be doing a disservice to my mom, who, what Jen said, had 2-3 jobs, quite literally, almost her entire life up until the end when she was working for me, ironically, in the small businesses I have. And, the reason we were a foster family in many respects was just my mom's grit, hard work, just making ends meet. We had people living in the house, strangers. She lived in the living room for a good part of her life. We kind of raised ourselves as sort of latchkey kids in the language of the vernacular of the past. And it was just, the struggles she had raising us, and the lack of support that I felt that I ever provided her. I talk about Hillary being the rock and being the rock star. And I relate that in part of this book. She died about 20 years ago, and she died in this respect. Let me describe it. I get to the office, and I get a voice message, and it says, "Hi, honey, it's your mom. And I will be around through next Thursday. That will be the last day of my life. If you're interested, you may want to drop by before then," which is a hell of a voicemail. I did what anyone would do. I immediately called my sister and what's going on? And she read me the riot act. She said, what's going on is you're not paying attention. You're just you're just focused on yourself. You're grinding away, doing your thing. You're not paying attention to your mom. My mom's breast cancer had come back. I'd frankly taken it for granted that, she'll be fine the second time.
Sure.
And so she did an assisted suicide. And it was illegal at the time, which is interesting. And by the way, pretty profound for me. If I did write a book about my governor years, I would talk about the fact that I signed legislation in her honor, making it legal in California on the basis of that memory. But that scene's a difficult one, and I've struggled with it all my life. I mean, the family was there together. Everyone said their goodbyes. I'd spent a few days with her before. She was struggling in deep pain. We had a courageous doctor who was willing to lose his license to support this. And my responsibility was just to give her 2 pills before the doctor came, just to relax her a little bit before he did the actual cocktail. And she was in there, and she had a book, and she really waited for just Hillary and I to be there as the last people with her. And I want to talk with my sister right here, a little out of school, but it was very intense as the doctor left. And it was a process that unfolded over 5-10 minutes. And my mother coming in and out of state, talking about our childhood, looking at these photos. And Hillary looked at me, and I looked at her, I said, "It's okay." And we were both crying, and she just ran out. And then I was sort of stuck, and I didn't know if I should leave. I didn't know what to do. And I was with her for those last minutes. And there was no, the credits didn't roll. It wasn't some wonderful romantic ending. It was deep breaths and struggle. And I remember holding her hand, and then I remember putting my head down on her chest for 10 minutes, just crying, and saying things to her that I didn't have the guts to say 5 minutes before when she was alive, and feeling tremendous shame. And I struggled with that for years and years and years, and it's only through the process of writing this that, again, I started to let it go.
To me, she's the center character in the book.
She's a center character,
So,
and she's, and that's what Jen described as the grit and the rock.
But
and,
you also
and that's the
you also
relationship.
call her in the book impenetrable, and you recall when she told you, quote, "It's okay to be average," when you were struggling with dyslexia too. There was a lot of hard.
Well, the big part of the book as well is talking about something that's familiar, and I met someone in the back, and thank you, this beautiful young girl who said thank me for being honest about my learning disability, because she's struggling with it as well. And a big part of this book is that relationship to my own academic challenges, my own insecurity that marks, my own anxiety, and the fact that I'm still that guy. It doesn't go away. You have to sort of work around it. It's the reason I talk about not reading speeches, because it's not because I don't want to have someone write a speech and then I'll look at the paper and read it. It's that I can't. I could do teleprompters, that's it, and that's not easy, and I can't stand doing them. And so that's the guy in the back, that's the guy with the sweaty hands and the pounding heart beat, but it's also the heart of the story with my mom, because I never appreciated how hard it was for her to have to raise a kid that was always trying to quit, that literally was running out of schools. I talk a lot about that, faking being sick, going to school to school to school. That's why we ended up in Marin, because I bounced around schools in San Francisco, and she couldn't take it anymore. And the relationship that I had with my own kids that were struggling with reading, and it was like a moment you're like, oh God, it wasn't just about me. It's about my mom, and not to have her back where I can just thank her for all those sacrifices and how hard that was. So I hated her, to your point, when she said it's okay to be average.
Yeah.
And it took 15 years till I sat there with my kids struggling and realized, wait a second, she was just saying it's okay to be you. And in her own exhaustion, it was just like, you don't have to be someone else. And so, again, this notion of just let it go, and this cathartic nature of this whole process.
The idea of letting this mask go that you talked about. One of the things, now, your mother didn't want you to go into politics. She told you, quote, "Get out before it's too late." I think it's too late. But your father's dream, of course, was to be a politician, as you mentioned. And you learned that this was one of the reason their marriage fell apart. How did you reconcile these competing dreams your parents had for you? And you fell into your dad's footsteps in many ways.
Well, I'll never forget the day the recall qualified. I was like, Mom was right,
Yeah.
And there's plenty of those moments. I mean, this is, my God. I mean, it's been a hell of a run here. And by the way, I can't believe it's taken me this long. All because of one person who's sitting here today, Willie Brown. Willie is literally the reason I'm sitting up here today, period, full stop. Would not have happened without him. And, we could talk, there's some funny stories, I think, about getting schooled in a different way by Willie Brown about how politics works. But, I've always tried to reconcile this. My mom just wanted me to be happy. And she struggled with that all her life. She self-medicated, and I talk about jugs of Safeway wine. She tried to go to bed early because she would wake up early and just hard work and hard enough, just raising us on her own. Again, came from no money, no wealth. And my father was distant when we were growing up, and so money was always an issue. It was a stress, and it was always stressful for her. To your question earlier, the relationship I had to him, which was one of adventure. And it was always connected, yes, to the Getty family. Once a year, we would go on these unbelievable vacations. And I describe many of them in the book. But I would always go back home to a mom who would open the door and go, "Hi, honey. Hope you had a wonderful trip. Good night." And would never talk about it again. And so I write about that and that sort of struggle of not being an imposter necessarily, but also never feeling comfortable. And I never forget, there's a story in here when I was a teenager, and we went to Spain in some fancy party, King Juan.
This is the coming out party.
For one of the King of Spain's niece or something. It was one of these just over the top.
Yeah, I went to that too, but go ahead.
Yeah. I remember you.
Yeah.
Fondly.
Yeah. As if.
And those high heels that you were walking around in. Yeah.
Oh, God. Another
But
life.
there was I'll never forget with Ann and Gordon, San Francisco.
All right, we're in Spain. Keep
portion
going.
of the family, but no, with their 4 kids.
Yeah.
And I was walking around the 4 kids, and I was sort of the 5th. I was the same age as Andrew, who became a roommate years later. But Andrew and I were walking around, and we were there, and I just remember this couple, this very fancy couple, going, "Oh, the Getty boys, it's so wonderful to have you here in Spain." And the whole thing, fabulous Californians, and said, "Which one are you?" to me. And I went, "I'm Gavin Newsom, not one of the 4." And immediately, physically, she shifted and had no interest whatsoever in engaging with me. And it was a moment where you just immediately knew who you were and who you weren't. And again, it's that identity that I talk about it a lot because it shapes a lot. Those privileges were absolutely real. Mm-hmm. Those doors opened that would never have opened without that. But the relationship to that and the relationship to the truth of who I was and where I went back home, and it just is never, for me, I struggled to tell that story. And as I say, my mom deserves the truth, and that is part of why I wrote this book.
Though you seemed, most people think of you that way, seeming very fancy Prince Gavin, right?
And no, I get it. And you put gel in your hair, and I talk about that.
You do. I finally found out your secret.
The blue suits, the whole thing. I mean, look, I'm not naive. I even talk about the way I give speeches, move my hands, using words like "ira,"
like this,
all this stuff, and all that mock 24/7. It is what it is. And so one of the things maybe it took me 58 whatever years. I now realize you can't control what you can't control.
Right.
And all my life I've been trying to control all this, control the narrative, control how people think about me, and I've struggled with it. And again, in the process of writing this book, let it go. And I'm serious. I hope everyone here writes their own story, if for no other reason, just to find grace. The word for me is grace. There's humility, a lot of humility in this book, but just to find that and let it go.
So let's talk about that, because one of the things people do think of you is that you have been bold, that you haven't thought about imagery, although many people think you do. But as mayor, you are best known for making San Francisco the first city to issue marriage license to same-sex couples. I got married during that time here in San Francisco. It was a great benefit. At the time, it was against state and federal law, and only about a third of Californians supported it. Now, history is on your side here, and one of the interesting things, I had an encounter with a very well-known politician who was saying Gavin's finished, I remember. And they said, and I'll never forget this, said, Americans aren't ready for gay marriage. This is a very well-known politician. And for some reason, I stopped being a reporter and I said, it's called leadership, and they were like, and I was like, sorry, it doesn't matter if people are ready. But You know, there is what you did was really forward, and there's an uncomfortable parallel to Trump in a weird way, that his raft of executive orders also defying the law. Talk about it's okay when a leader defies the law, and that's leadership, and when it's not okay. It's a really, when I was just thinking about that.
I love the question. I see Steve Cava's here, and many couples that were part of that winter of love. 4,036 couples, 46 states, 6 countries came here in February to just say 2 magical words. They wasn't even that remarkable. There's magical, I do. I talk a lot about that story. Paul Pelosi's here, and how, Paul, I took your seat. When Nancy, Madam Speaker, was kind enough to invite me. I was a newly minted mayor. I went back to meet with congressional delegation, and coincidentally was the same day that President Bush was given his State of the Union. And I was going to leave. We had a reception in the Capitol, and the speaker asked, "Would you interested in sticking around for the event?" I said, "I don't have a ticket." She goes, "I don't think Paul's going to go." And so I took his ticket, went back up on the rafters, and sat there. And I'll never forget, after the end of the speech, and you can go back to the speech, it was a re-election speech, and it ended with, "We need a constitutional amendment to make marriage between a man and a woman," and people standing ovation, the whole thing. But we're walking back, and no one could bring cell phones in. So you're waiting in line for the cell phones. And I'll never forget, true story, as I'm standing there waiting in line, the couple behind me was just talking about the speech and how proud they were of the president. And one of them said, and said the words, "I'm just so sick and tired of the homosexual agenda." And it was the way they said homosexual that I literally turned around. And I was about to introduce myself as a mayor of San Francisco. I didn't have the guts or courage, and I meekly got my phone, and instead of going back down to see Nancy and the congressional delegation after the speech, I walked in the opposite direction outside of the Capitol. And I'll never forget, the door locked and I couldn't get back in. And it was a cold night, and I called Steve Cava, who was my chief of staff. And I said, "Did you hear the speech?" He goes, "Oh, yes, sir." I said, "Well, we need to do something about it." None of us knew what we were going to do. Came back, fast forward this, a few days later, and we decided that we were going to marry one couple, Phyllis Lyon and Del Martin. They've been together some 47 years, and we were going to file a lawsuit. But word got out that we were going to do this, and the federal courts were right across the street, and they said that they were going to get a temporary restraining order. They were going to stop us from moving. And then we realized, I think Daniel Lurie's here as well. It's good to be mayor, Daniel. I realized I was mayor, and I can open City Hall up earlier than 9. And so we called Phyllis and Del, and we said, "Get here at 8, and we got to get this done by 9 o'clock. Because they're likely to shut us down." And Mabel Tang, who was remarkable, she was the county clerk, and they got married. I wasn't there. I was up in the office, ironically, because I didn't want to make it political. Little did we know. And Phyllis and Del got married, walked upstairs, and we all waited. I remember being in the office, room 200, waiting for the court's decision. It was 9:30, 10:30, and eventually court decision came out, and they said there's no irreparable harm. And I was like, "What does that even mean?" Trying to get a lawyer. They said, "I guess that means we can continue to do this." And that's when we had a few other couples that were there and said, "Well, what about us?" And after that, all hell broke loose.
So you just...
And it was... And I remember, I say that with love, Arnold's like, it's chaos, in San Francisco. And people were critical, but the most critical part, and I want to get specific to your question, it was a great question, I'll get to it.
Okay.
But some of the people I admire most in political life, the ones that all told me just 3 weeks prior, the one universal advice, just do what you think is right. It goes by in a flash. You're a new mate, just do what you think is right. Those same folks were some of the most critical. and the party was, you may not recall this, I was hardly favored nation status at the DNC. They were like, you don't really have to go to Boston for the convention. It's all good. You're new mayor. You should really focus on homelessness. And, and so
they didn't want you. You were.
I went through that process of trying to figure out the question you just asked. I was asking myself. I was being condemned by people I admired, people I really revered, including leaders in the LGBTQ community that were like, who the hell is this guy to do this? And so, and by the way, including, and I talk about this in the book, my father was really worried about this. Old Irish Catholic, West Side guy, and he's like, you don't need to do this. You didn't campaign. No one was even talking. Civil unions were barely on the conversation. I mean, Willie was out there doing domestic partnerships, was a hero, and Leslie Katz, others were talking about civil unions, but we weren't there necessarily. And no one was like, there were a few people outside advocating, but it wasn't on the agenda. And there's a scene where I describe Joe Kachet, a great lawyer, my Uncle Brennan, who literally had an intervention with me the day before. They honestly tried to talk me out of it. And I got into it a little bit, and I couldn't. They said, what about this? What about that? What about this strategy? And I wasn't able to debate.
So do you regret it at all, even today?
No, because I said in that, and this is what I'm describing in the book, I got into it, and I got frustrated and flustered, and I was at the Balboa, I'll never forget, it's in the book. And Joe really pushed me, fierce lawyer, amazing advocate. And he goes, he really pushed me. Tell me why. Why the hell are you doing this? I said, Joe, because it's the right thing to do. And I remember saying that. And Joe literally turned around to my Uncle Brennan, and my dad said, boys, it's the right thing to do, and he'll be doing it tomorrow morning. And so I was struggling with that, and I started struggling. I was, being condemned, having second doubts, and figuring out, we broke the law, but when the court said stop, we stopped. It wasn't a, speed bump. It was a stop sign. The rule of law applied. And that's what we did. We applied the law. We pushed the envelope. We used not just our formal authority, but our moral authority. That's the frame of my response to your question. And that is one thing Donald Trump is incapable of. He doesn't understand the difference between formal authority and moral authority. And that's the distinction.
All right. Thank you for that answer. So I'm going to move on to some other topics. You recently scored a huge win with redistricting California. And Democrats are picking up 5 House seats. It might not be enough to overcome Republican gerrymanders. There's a threat of obviously illegal executive orders to stop or at least slow voting. Talk about what Democrats need to do now to avoid getting shut out of power. Speaking of someone who uses his authority and executive order.
Look, I've been a little critical of my party, and this is not a knock at any individual. The party is many parts. Not, and one body, but it's many parts. That we constantly on the receiving end of, CRT, DEI, ESG, we're constantly being shape-shifted. We're not shifting the conversation. We're on the defense so often. That's why I started showing up on Fox, and that's why, I debated Ron DeSantis a few years ago, and Sean Hannity, both at the same time, and try just to try to lean in, just to take responsibility. Again, by the way, it's in the process of writing this book where I was just like, for things to change, I've got to change. And I've got to own up to my own complicity at the moment, my own timidity, my own anxieties, my own insecurities. Don't just preach, practice. And so it was all shape-shifting at the same time. And I started leaning in. I started getting a little bit more aggressive. It came after Dobbs. And I was really worried. I was like, what the hell's wrong? Our party, the surround sound, the propaganda networks, and just the bullshit, the illusion rules, not facts of Fox and Newsmax and One American News and the right-wing echo chamber, and how we were constantly on the defense. And so over the course of the last few years, I've been iterating. But after that recall, where there was finality, talk about humility, I was like, this weaponization, I experienced it in a different way. The RNC, Newt Gingrich, Mike Huckabee, all these guys trying to take us out. And so it began the process of shifting. The fires in LA, and let me get to the redistricting. The fires in LA set it back again. I was down there within a couple hours. And Trump I was there with Biden, the president of the United States and the governor down there within a few hours of this fire. And Trump is just blowing us up, saying it was because we didn't turn on the water faucet from Northern California, the sprinklers weren't working. And you think this, but I started turning on, I'm watching Fox, they're working on the next recall, and I'm getting friends saying, why didn't you send the water down? I'm like, you're kidding.
Right.
Elon Musk is doubling down. And I'm like, this is the middle of the fire. And I'm like, holy shit, we are not prepared for this. And that's when our social media began to shift a little bit. We put a California Facts website up. We started to take it to the next level. But it was June of last year when Donald Trump federalized 4,000 National Guard and sent 700 active duty Marines, not overseas, but to the second largest city in the United States of America, that everything shifted. That was the red line. And that's when we began the process of drawing a line and said, you know what? We've got to significantly shift our tone and tenor. And I'll just remind you, and I know this is long-winded, but I want to remind everybody, Donald Trump called Greg Abbott demanding 5 seats. He said he was, quote unquote, entitled. The president of the United States said he was entitled to 5 seats in a mid-decade redistricting to rig the 2026 November of this year election because he knows he's going to get crushed. He's going to be shellacked in this election. He knows he's going to lose. So he's trying to rig the election. But what the difference was, and I talked to Nancy Pelosi and Zoe Lofgren and others, I never expected what they were able to achieve in a 5-day period, which was consensus. And few folks expected us as Democrats maybe to try to win the argument. Maybe we just try to show how right we are and how wrong Trump is. And maybe we can get an op-ed in the New York Times. And instead, we fought fire with fire. We punched the bully back in the map, and we put that map back on the ballot. And we won, and we kicked their ass, 22%. And Donald Trump lost, and the Republican Party lost. And that shows what we're capable of. When we fight fire with fire, conviction, the problem with the Democratic Party so often is we appear weak. And we've got to be stronger, and we've got to be more assertive. And so that's, it's the spirit a little bit of marriage
the
equality.
question is,
it's the spirit, I think, that is required of this moment.
The question would be, which I think a lot of people are worried about, is becoming too much like them, right? Let me get to in every episode. I know, someone else wants. Every episode we get a question from an outside expert. Here's yours. Play it.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Welch, co-host of I've Had It podcast, and the big question I want to ask you is, you recently said that Democrats need to be more culturally normal. And Governor, I think that's a very dangerous statement because me, a very mouthy woman in a Bible Belt state, if I were culturally normal here, I would have to submit to my husband, and I wouldn't be able to have a podcast wherein I could critique every little thing you say. Governor Newsom, do you think this is dangerous language for you to use to an electorate that should be embracing diversity across the board? Diversity should be normal.
Well, diversity should be normal. Who's been the biggest champion of diversity?
No, I get that.
Hold on. No, but I just don't accept the frame of the question.
All right, okay.
No, but let me answer the question. I don't accept that frame at all.
All right.
Diversity, that's our greatest strength. We don't tolerate our diversity, we celebrate our diversity. We live in the most diverse state, in the world's most diverse democracy. 27% of this state's foreign born. We practice pluralism. That's a point of pride. That's a core value. She should know that. When it comes to the issue of forensics, of understanding how we gain power and get back in the majority, not just this year, but get back on our feet, win not just the House, but the Senate, and win back the White House, I think it's right to reflect on the past and to stress test it. And there's been a lot of forensics, but not, I think, the kind of autopsy that would ultimately illuminate what are our strengths, what are our weaknesses. So in that context, it's part of that larger discovery. I've talked about this on my podcast on multiple occasions. I have I'm not making this up, 27 pages of my own autopsy on what the hell happened last November in the election. Trying to understand the contours. Was it incumbency? Was it interest rates? Was it inflation scars? Was it 107 days versus 119 days? Across the spectrum. And so I'm trying to have conversations publicly in that respect. That's what I'm doing on the podcast. That's why I'm inviting people in that I know are uncomfortable, because I'm trying to understand the contours of the other side, so we have ability then to compete. And that goes to why I agree with the frame that set up that question. And that is, no, I get it. You know, we're putting a mirror up to Donald Trump, unquestionably. And the day we did that, Trump wasn't complaining about some of those all-cap tweets. It was all the folks on Fox that seemed to be so offended. And they were saying, boy, where's his wife? She should wash his mouth out with soap. This is so unbecoming of a governor to talk like this. Lacking any situational awareness, they haven't said a damn word about Donald Trump dressing up as the Pope or Superman or putting his face on Mount Rushmore. They didn't say a damn word. They've countenanced that forever. So I understand that instinct. And part of me at first was like, do we really want to do this? But we need to do it. We need to put that mirror up to Trump and Trumpism. And it's not, because none of this is normal. And my whole point is this: we will lose our country. We will lose our republic. This guy is not screwing around. It wasn't just the federalization of the National Guard, which we said in June was a preview of things to come. And you saw that in DC. You saw that in Chicago. You've seen it in Minnesota. We said it when we kicked off the campaign for Prop 50. You may recall at the Democracy Center. And there was a guy out there with dozen masked men trying to intimidate people from walking in the event by the name of Greg Bovino, dressed up as if he just got off the set of a 1930s movie, if you catch my drift. And we said, he is a preview of things to come. And it's exactly what's happened. You've seen Ravino all across the country. You saw him on Election Day, the BORTAC teams, right there in front of the Dodger Stadium, trying to intimidate our diverse communities on Election Day. These guys are not screwing around. I was just in Fulton County. Let me finish, because this is important.
But I want you to answer
because it's important. Wake up. He's in Fulton County. We met with the head of their elections commission, trying to take over the election in Fulton County, a critical county in this state. He's trying to federalize the voting. 15 states minimum, he said, at least, all Democratic states. The SAVE Act, that's not about voter ID, it's about who can vote. It's about voter registration. This guy is not screwing around. The most corrupt president in American history.
Okay.
And we will lose our country if we don't fight back and push back. So yes, I cringe sometimes at my social media as well.
Right.
But I think it's important in this environment that we call out the bullshit that we're seeing 24/7.
But you were talking about, I think she was addressing Democrats, how they, when you said culturally normal, I didn't know what that meant.
And you know what? For me, I was stuck on some of the issues within the prisons. And those are hard to explain. Culturally normal doesn't mean right or wrong.
Right.
It means how people feel about certain issues that sometimes are difficult issues to explain. And, respectfully, there are some difficult issues.
There are.
That are difficult to explain. And in terms of winning elections, how we navigate that's important. And let's go back to marriage equality. It's in the book. There are a number of elected officials that blame me for the outcome of the election that November. So I don't think it's an unfair thing to talk about how we win elections and a sensitivity on the basis of my own relationship to that, and understanding the relationship to how we look at the larger map in this country.
Although some might say that's putting on a mask, that you're not really, you talk about masks.
I'm not suggesting you don't speak your truth.
Right.
I'm not suggesting any of that. It's what you emphasize, what you disproportionately focus on, and how you navigate a world where they're, again, trying to shape-shift, and we are on the defense. Again, that's why I went on the offense as it relates to the banning bitch and the cultural purge that the right wing is doing. And that's why we are iterating in that respect.
Okay, let's go through some issues. You have less than a year in office. One of the most high-profile fights you're in right now is over a proposed one-time tax for billionaires. A big labor union is trying to get the measure on the upcoming ballot. You've said you're going to fight it. This is one of these issues dividing Democrats at the time when voters are worried about affordability. Talk a little bit about that. That fight's an interesting fight because it also dovetails into the idea of the entire tech industry losing its fucking mind. And shifting hard to the right. Should you try to woo back these people? Is that what's happening, like Mark Zuckerberg, Mark Andreessen, and Jeff Bezos? Or speaking of standing up, do voters want a leader that stands up to them? This may not be the way. The billionaire tax may not be the method.
There's
two things, yes.
4 issues
okay.
there. I'm doubling. I mean, I think there are 4 issues. I mean, we can get into, what's going on with those 3 individuals you represent. We could talk about what's going on with tech more broadly.
Well, we need some psychologists.
And how they're losing their mind. We could talk about taxation, which I did extensively in my State of the State a few weeks ago. I promoted, I wasn't defending, I actually made the case for California's progressive tax system. And I'll remind folks, 16 states tax their poorest residents more than California taxes its richest. Who's the high tax state? You look at the most regressive taxes in America, that's Texas, that's Florida. Who are the high tax states? Yes, we have a progressive tax policy, and that means we disproportionately rely on a few taxpayers relative to the overall population. And that has benefited us greatly. It's why we have universal preschool. That's why we have universal health care, regardless of pre-existing conditions' ability to pay. That's why we've been able to do 379, almost 380,000 child care slots and subsidies. That's why we've been able to do a lot of the things we're doing. As it relates to this specific tax, do we need to have a tax policy in this country and go back to the old tax rates and consider a new tax rates for the ultra wealthy? Absolutely, and I've been advocating for that and I believe that. But at a state basis, the challenge is ability people to move. And you've seen that. It's not anecdotal now.
No.
The number of people who have moved out of the state and how easy that is. So I'm concerned about that on the basis of the volatility of our taxes and how that can impact the progressivity of our taxes and impact our existing tax structure in a deleterious way. Final thing on that, that tax doesn't go to teachers. It doesn't support firefighters. That tax doesn't go to child care workers. That tax doesn't allow us to do, that tax is for one particular purpose, one time, and doesn't benefit. So there's also issues I have with the details of it.
The way it was deployed, so if you were, say, president, you might do a tax.
It's a very different conversation. But at a state level, yeah. You have to recognize and reconcile that reality. And it's a real reality, it just is. As is the reality that many, but not all, we haven't had this conversation, and I should be asking you. I don't know that tech has moved to the right. I think a few loudmouths have.
That's correct.
You look at the vast majority of folks that work in these companies, they're still voting, and from my perspective, in an enlightened way. And a lot of those folks that have moved to the right were kind of dabbling in that space already.
Yeah.
So, I think that's a component part of this. That said, man, I was quoting Plutarch the other day. Plutarch. But he was a historian, which is fascinating, about 50 AD. He was warning the Athenians that the imbalance between the rich and the poor is the oldest and most fatal ailments of all republics. 2,000 years ago, warning about this imbalance. I mean, we're talking about the first trillionaires in this country. 10% of folks own 2/3 of all the wealth in this country. This is not sustainable. We have got to democratize our economy so we can save democracy. And so there is fundamental restructuring of our economy that needs to take shape. And that's among the debates and the last time we did split roll. And that's going to be part of the debate moving forward as it relates to stabilizing the volatility in our tax structure as well. But that's, I think, a legit critique as it relates to how these guys, to your point, have reacted
Yeah.
to this tax that conflates other aspects of it.
Yeah, they're very hurt. Too bad. I always say they're so poor, all they have is money. So speaking of which, because that would be a federal thing, this is your last year as governor. We have just a few more.
You said that 3 damn times. It's so
sorry.
depressing.
All right, let's not do the exhausting coy thing.
No, but it's 3 times.
All right, I don't want to do the exhausting coy thing. I think everyone assumes you're running for president. And you're well practiced. You're well practiced in dodging the will you. I hate that question. Anyway, you did say one of your sons told you recently that he doesn't want you to run. What would compel you to run in spite of the request from your son?
Nice. Well done.
Thank you.
Done.
That's why I'm paid the big bucks.
Montana's here. Sorry, Montana, I'm gonna lay you out a little bit. My oldest, who's 16, and she says this. I think it was. I haven't seen it, but she told me, and it may not be true. She says, "I have a calendar, Dad, counting down the days till you're no longer governor." And
wow.
And I think she's calling it her version of Liberation Day. So she, 16-year-old, if you get my drift. So she can finally be free. And so I've got that.
She's almost 17.
She's almost, as she told us today.
Yeah.
Later in the calendar year. But she'll always be sweet 16 to me.
Wow.
And then my 14-year-old boy, though, he saw some headline that misrepresented a little bit of the facts, where it said Newsom poised to run for, whatever. And he goes,
President.
He texts me, and he goes, "Dad, I hear you're running. Are you running for president?" I said, "No, I'm not." He goes, "I would never do," and I literally texted, I said, "I would never do that without you." He goes, "Good." And he said, 14-year-old boy, and he goes, "Good, Dad, because we're too young and you need to spend more time with us." Oh. And I literally, no BS, screenshot of that. I have that. And my wife reminds me of that all the time. And so does this book. Because, Jen, she never said it, but she had to think it. What kind of husband are you going to be? What kind of father are you going to be? She's got a rock star dad. We just celebrated his 85th birthday last night. 4 extraordinary daughters. He's the manifest. You want, like central casting. Mom and dad coached the girls' teams, basically retired relatively young age to be there for his daughters. And now he's there like he was with his daughters for for my kids, his grandkids. An extraordinary person. And that shaped her consciousness of life. And here I am talking about my dad and my mom and my relationship with my dad when I was young, which is, again, very distant as a father. And I can only imagine what was going through her head when we first had our kids. And so in every way, and she mentioned Mimi Silbert, who's, one of my heroes and saved my life in so many ways, and how she really cracked me open. And I don't want to make those mistakes, and I'm not going to make those mistakes. So you ask a direct question.
Yeah.
They all have veto power. And if any one of them say no chance, I won't even give it a second thought. I'm not going to screw up my marriage to this rock star woman, this extraordinary person, my wife, and I'm not going to screw up my time with my kids. Period. Full stop.
That's actually a very good answer. So I'm going to go through. We have only a few minutes. We want to go through some news stuff because there's a lot going on.
The boxer and brief part of
very
the
quick
conversation.
One.
Yeah.
These are a couple of news stories, and they have to do with California too. On Friday, Trump ordered the government to stop using Anthropic's AI models. He called Anthropic the quote radical left AI company because it wanted to prevent the Pentagon from using the products for domestic surveillance or powering autonomous weapons without human involvement. A few hours later, OpenAI announced a deal with Pentagon with. I'm not sure it has similar guardrails. I'll question that. Talk about that. We're seeing pushback here from tech, as you noted. You just said they're not as.
I can tell you through the prism of my subjectivity, Dario has been a real leader.
He's the CEO.
The CEO of Anthropic. And so it does not surprise me because he's a person of character. He helped shape the nation's first AI frontier model, large language model, regulations in the state of California, which I was proud to be part of. And he was a fierce advocate for going further and constantly pushing us to do more to address the peril, not just the promise of AI. And so he had a red line, and he had the courage to hold that line in a way that so few CEOs do. That's why I have a Patriot site with knee pads to give to our universities and law firms and media and CEOs that are selling out to Donald Trump. And Anthropic did not. And he deserves our praise, and he deserves our support.
All right, next one. We're taping this on Saturday night. About 24 hours ago, President Trump joined Israel in attacking Iran. The New York Times editorial board wrote that Trump's decision is reckless and ill-defined. On X, you linked to one of Trump's old tweets where he criticized Obama for striking Libya because of bad poll numbers. But you also wrote that Iranian leadership needs to go. Apparently, the Ayatollah has been killed. There'll be another Ayatollah, by the way. Are you worried about this move, and what do you think it stems from?
I think it stems from weakness masquerading as strength. It stems from its complete failure of this administration, this historic president who's historically unpopular, that is trying to distract from his failures across the spectrum. He doubled down on stupid during the State of the Union. No course correction at all. And you're absolutely right. In 2011, and he didn't just say it once, he did videos condemning, criticizing President Obama, suggesting somehow he was going to do this, and it was a desperate attempt for his reelection. But you had Tulsi Gabbard out there saying regime change is wrong. You had J.D. Vance saying that they lied to you. He lied to you. So reckless is the only way to describe this. He didn't describe to the American people what the end game is here. He didn't describe the existential threat of the moment, the immediacy of the crisis at hand. There wasn't one. He manufactured it. And now we're manufacturing a crisis of outcomes unknown and the uncertainty it marks at this moment. And that's Donald Trump, the chaos president, this wrecking ball president across the board. Destruction is not strength. And once again, we've seen him destroy not only our allies in relationship to the rest of the world, but we're seeing him destroy any capacity to explain fundamentally what the core American interest is at this moment, to declare war, to go to war with a regime. And all of this is playing out in real time. And we just pray for our troops, we pray for our allies, and we pray that Donald Trump is temporary and his time is up in just 3 years.
So, I have about 3 more questions. Are you worried that it's linked to the midterms? Obviously, that has come up. He has an executive order ready to do all manner of nonsense around the midterm elections and elections.
It goes to what I just described. Yeah. Again, this guy is not screwing around. What more evidence do you need? He tried to wreck this country and light democracy on fire on January 6th. He called that same Fulton County folks looking, Secretary of State, for 11,000, 12,000 votes. He tried to rig the midterm elections as it relates to redistricting, and he's going about with these masked men and these board tack teams and literally every state he's organized these folks that, by the way, have sworn an oath of office to Trump, not the Constitution of the United States, the secret police. These are acts of authoritarianism. He's not hiding it, nor is he hiding his disdain for any kind of independent thinking. What is his attack? All these institutions have one thing in common. His attack is on independent thinking. And you're seeing it. My biggest concern now is what's happening with media. Mm-hmm. And how and this concentration in the hands of just a few folks. He's deciding the prime time lineup, these places. The impact, by the way, of this deal in California will be outsized in terms of layoffs and creativity.
Yeah.
So this is all happening in real time. Forgive me again. Back to washing my mouth, with soap. That's why we have to be more aggressive. That's why we have to be more vigilant. That's why we have to be stronger and much more aggressive in this moment.
So last 2 questions. I will note that Epic Fury has the same initials as Epstein files. What a coincidence. The fallout, it keeps ballooning though, and the number of high-profile resignations in the wake their release. We learned this week the files didn't include some records related to very heinous allegations unproven against Donald Trump. It seems like another example of the White House doing, the DOJ doing the White House. That's what they're doing. In the face of that, this is an issue I thought had real legs. Scott and I argued about it many months ago. I thought it was critically important, this issue. How do you look at what's unfolding with the Epstein files? And many people think the attack was related to getting...
Well, there's got to be something he's hiding. I mean, give me a break. No one has worked so hard at making this go away than Pam Bondi on behalf of Donald Trump and the FBI. And by the way, that same DOJ, he's demanding $230 million of money. The IRS, he's demanding $10 billion. Please, I hope you saw that. He's demanding a settlement of $10 billion, says he's going to negotiate with himself, and he may, because he's a man of character, may give it to charity. This is the guy that got not just a $400 million plane, because he called Qatar and said, I want $400 million plane, but got close to $1 billion in the big, beautiful bill to retrofit the plane. The Trump story is a story of corruption. It's a corruption story. The Witkoff family, the Trump family, world financial literacy. The tariffs are a corruption story. Why do you think he was weeping around the loss of the tariff? Because that was about his personal portfolio, as much or more than anything else. So you ask about the Epstein file, it's all in that same place and shape. I was with John Ossoff the other day down in Georgia, and I love what he played, this notion of the Epstein class. It's all shaped in that. All of these trips overseas, they have one thing in common. The family goes out first to get the deal done, the UAE, get the $2 billion for the crypto. In return, you get high-valued computer chips. Same thing that happened on the tariffs, 26% reduction as it relates to Vietnam. They got the golf course, the Trump family, fast track, $1.5 billion. All happening in open sight. But there's clearly things in the Epstein files that Donald Trump doesn't want you to know. And my biggest fear on this, I said it the other day, and I really fear this. And I hope this is not the case, and that's why it's absolutely critical that the gavel is in the hands of Speaker Jeffries this November. It is foundational. But even with that, there's a scenario where I can see Trump starting to pardon key members of his administration. There's scenarios where it's not about redaction. These things are deleted and disappear. That's how critical this moment is of vigilance. That's why I'm very proud of, so many of these Californian leaders in Congress, and Robert Garcia being a leader, a particular leader in this space, that have been very aggressive. And again, it's just about maintaining vigilant and not, in the spirit of the wag of the dog, not continue to take our eye. We cannot take our eye off the ball. We can't allow this to be normalized. We can't allow, please don't use the phrase, this is just Trump being Trump. Those are deadly words. That's what he wants. It's the shock and awe. He wants to break us down. He wants to exhaust us. And that's why this is not easy. And I know our time's up, but I just want to say thank you to all of you, not just for being here tonight, not just being here in relationship to this book and for yourselves, but for each other. Thank you for showing up. San Francisco always shows up. No Kings rallies. This is the spirit of this city. And thank you for not giving in to the cynicism and all the anxiety and fear out there. And it's hard. I know it's hard. It's exhausting. This is exhausting.
So my last question then, what is your best case scenario? What is your best case scenario? And what is the one that worries you? You told Emma now that in some ways J.D. Vance scares you more than Trump in a lot of ways, obviously.
Well, I think time of light, I will say
What's
this.
your best case scenario? What's your worst case scenario? Start with worst. Because then we end on a high note. You get that?
Well, look, I've painted a picture, and I've said this before. I mean, we're celebrating the 250th anniversary of the Founding Fathers, the best of the Roman Republic, Greek democracy, co-equal branches of government, something Trump had to deal with the Supreme Court decision the other day, had to reconcile that. The rule of law, not the rule of Don. And if it's not dawning on all of us what we're up against in the existential nature, that will reflect the worst case scenario. That we lose grip with the insidiousness of this moment and how vicious these guys are on the other side and how complicit Murdoch Inc. is at this moment. In the primetime lineup at Fox, and Sean Hannity, and Laura Ingraham, and all the rest. And by the way, Laura Ingraham, who's in business with Donald Trump Jr. and Chamath, whose partner on his podcast is David Sachs. You want corruption in open sight, connecting the dots to our media, the whole thing. If we don't call this out, that's the worst case scenario, because we won't celebrate this historic project of our founding fathers in the 251st anniversary. We can lose this country, we can lose our republic. The best case scenario is you keep showing up. You don't give in to the cynicism, that fear and anxiety, because you recognize you have agency. You can shape the future. You're the antidote to that. And so that's the power. It's, Brandeis said it. In a democracy, the most important office is not governor or president. It's office of citizen. Active, not inert citizenship. So maintain that vigilance, maintain that energy and that daring, and keep showing up. And if we do that, Donald Trump's presidency as we know it will end this November. It will end as we know it this November.
So then, very last question. What's the name of the sequel to this? Old man in a walker? I don't know.
Yeah. I'm getting there.
What is the sequel? That happens. What is this?
I don't know what the sequel is, but I will say this, and let me end on this, because I appreciate it. I appreciate here talking about the book, and thank you. I hope some of you read it. Don't just read some of you are just gonna look in the index to see if your name appears, and I get that. By the way, I've written some personal notes in the index to say, gotcha, found you. But I hope people will see aspects of their own lives and their own journey in here, and I hope people will see, there may not be a sequel, and I get that. To the point is, you talk about my sell-by date. I'm serious, that little anxiety inducing for me, because I've always been that young man in a hurry. I've, been in this process, since Willie Brown appointed me the Parking and Traffic Commission. That was like, what's this guy doing next? The whole thing. And so if there's nothing next, I'm just, I was finally able to put my version of events out there. I was able to tell my mom how much I loved her, even if she's not around, but I was able to say that, and I was able to describe that. I was able to reflect on my own journey, my own relationship with my wife and my kids, and how important they are to me, and how important all of you have been to me, and how important the city has been to me, and how it's shaped me. And I'll close on this. My dad starts in the book, he says he didn't know what came first, the Irish cop or San Francisco. And it was a way of connecting my history to this city with his great-grandfather, who was that Irish cop. My kids, 6th generation San Franciscans. And how special and proud I am of this city, and how proud I am to have been born in this city, and how lucky we all are to be in this precious and beautiful place at this remarkable time in American history. Thank you guys, all of you,
Gavin,
very, very much for being here today.
Gavin, thank you for joining us. I'm sorry about my voice, but thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Great to be with you. Thank you all. Thanks so much.